Naš prvi predavač danas dolazi nam iz Spotify-a. On je globalni direktor brand strategije, zove se Zach Pentel, a njegovo predavanje zove se Building a Modern Brand in a Post-Digital World. Tako da ako ste postdigitalci, uživat ćete u ovom predavanju, vidjeti na šta se to sve odnosi, a uporedo s tim, ako vam, mi nismo dovoljno atraktivni ili zgodni, imate i Polaris Hall, još se stignete tamo prebaciti, možete slušati predavanje Chapin Clarka pod nazivom Microtrust, How Faith in Brands is Built in Tweets and Instagram uploads. Tako da imate i ovdje i gore šansu da se educirate. Tokom trajanja konferencije je dapače, jako vas ohrabrujemo da postavljate pitanja. I to kako to ide, u gornjoj dvorani u Polarisu je mala intimna atmosfera, pa se ne možete izvući, dobit ćete mikrofon i urbi et orbi pred svima ćete reći vaše pitanje, a ovdje je to malo diskretnije. Ovdje imate aplikaciju Slido putem koje postavljate pitanja. Znači, odite na App Store, skinete Slido aplikaciju. Ako vam se baš ne da trošiti mjesta na mobitelu, možete otići na www.sli.do, ukucate hashtag Digital Day 2019. i postavite pitanje. To pitanje će se pokazati ovdje ako ga naši administratori odaberu kao dovoljno zanimljivog, pa ćemo postaviti gostu. Možete se potpisati ako baš želite biti slavni, a i ne morate, može to biti u diskreciji, ali će vaše pitanje se odgovoriti odmah. Kako biste znali koji je raspored i kojem postaviti pitanja, imate u vašim poklon paketima i brošuru sa kompletnim programom i naravno aplikaciju za program edukacije Dimak. Ako to učinite danas, dobit ćete naravno i popust kao sudionici konferencije, tako da nemojte propustiti tu fantastičnu priliku za Dimak program edukacije. Ja mislim da sam ja rekla sve što je potrebno za početak ovog dana. Jesam. Zach, please join us on stage. Is Zach here? Yeah? Veliki aplauz, molim vas.
Hey.
Hello and welcome.
Thank you so much. Hi. Thanks for having me. Thanks so much. I'm Zach Pentel. I'm head of brand strategy at Spotify. And that means a different thing in just about every single company. But in our case, that means that I oversee an in-house agency that's responsible for protecting and evolving and ultimately sort of crafting work around the Spotify brand. And we're a true full-service agency. We're up to, I think, 14 designers, I think 8 creative teams, full production and brand management and strategy as well. But that doesn't mean we don't work with external agencies as well. And that's because we're a global brand. And at this point, we're active in 78 different markets. And there's only so much global perspective that we can get out of a small team working out of New York City. When global music culture is as diverse as every single market that we come to life in, both in the way that people interact with music culture, the types of music they listen to, even just the ways they consume music. So we work really closely between our in-house group of 65 people now and external agencies all over the world to regionalize the work, to bring us the cultural insight that we need to make sure that our strategies are sufficiently global, if you will, and to work with us on things like artist campaigns that just require that sort of local touch that we wouldn't be able to pull off in the States. And in the pursuit of doing so, we've had to create a global brand as well that can be an umbrella across all of this diversity, essentially. So today, that's what I'm here to talk about a little bit, at least. Building a modern brand in a post-digital world, and at least some of our experience in doing so. And so to break that statement down just a little bit, a modern brand, this means something different, again, to every brand out there. I don't think there's one unified theory in how to build a brand in 2019, but at least what it means to us is a couple of things. A modern brand is built with purpose. It stands for more than just the products that you hold in your hand. That needs to have something underpinning it that creates a purpose that can sort of bring people in for something different than just the widget itself. That's a modern brand for sure. And that ultimately, it knows who it's designed for. It's more than just understanding your target audience. It's starting to declare who you're for. And in some cases, that also means stating who you're not for. I don't think we've sort of passed the age of building these giant monolithic global for everyone brands, and everything has to have a bit more specificity to it. And I think that audiences appreciate that specificity when it comes to life in a way that they can appreciate. So that's when we think about a modern brand, that's how we think about it. The post-digital, that's the more problematic one, with way more definitions as well. But again, the way that we think about it, indeed, at Spotify, is that it means sort of acknowledging the way that the interaction between technology and humanity is evolving. over the last 10 or 15 years or so. And the degree to which people are using technology and certainly apps and anything that lives behind a screen, not necessarily as a way to discover something brand new, but as a way to extend their sort of existing experience in some sort of meaningful way. There's often plenty of jokes about the degree to which people are becoming more sort of machine in the way that they interact with the world around them. And indeed, if we're interacting in a post-digital world, it means that we need to become more human as well. We need to meet them halfway and acknowledge that they're using these tools in a way that feels very real. It doesn't feel like it's a secondary thing. Screen time as a construct is even becoming a bit of a problematic thought when we're one voice command away from calling up today's news. We don't necessarily need to intermediate it with a tap. And it also means favoring purpose over novelty, especially as marketers. And this is something we remind ourselves of often at Spotify, despite being what I think is a fairly modern brand. You'll rarely see us building a microsite for the sake of building a microsite, or using VR as a technology when something more simple will do. And that's because the novelty of creating a new digital experience is something that at this point is sort of lost on the average consumer. They've seen so much of it. At this point, they're looking for things that really give them purpose and give them actual sort of something to hold on to. So that's what we think of post-digital. So to put those two together, I guess, for us at Spotify over the last, let's call it 3 or 4 years, as we've sort of evolved this brand to the place that it is today, it means building a brand that's vibrant and personable, something that feels very human, doesn't feel like it's entirely machine. It means defining our purpose and figuring out, yes, we build a music app with 30 million tracks and billions of playlists, but what's a layer deeper than that? What sort of meaning do people derive from interacting with our brand on a daily basis? And finally, making sure that we always have a point of view in any piece of communication that we put out into the world. Everything is brand building, from a single tweet in a customer service context up to a massive global campaign. We always have to have a point of view in everything we do and everything that we say. And we try to hold ourselves to the standard in all the work that we do. But that's the way that we sort of set off to build the brand that we have at the moment. And if you look back at 2015, maybe 2013, 2014, this is what we looked like. It was very green, it was very black and white, a lot of full color photography. Obviously, sort of one single unified point of view is certainly a thought, but it also was sort of one-dimensional. And if we think of the sort of vibrance of music culture, it wasn't necessarily capturing all of it. So one thing we set out to do was to try and bring this up a little bit and just modernize it quite a bit. This worked for the first 10 years of the company, give or take. It helped us establish the idea that Spotify was green, that we were associated with music, but it didn't necessarily take us to that next step. So one thing we decided to do, innocently enough, was update the green to a much better green, we thought. Something that was a bit brighter and more on trend, something we thought that would pop more in the App Store, that people would appreciate. As a brand team, we thought this is just the simplest and most transformative thing we can do with a single click. So in mid-2015, we flipped a switch, changed the color of the logo, which meant in the App Store, it changed to the new green. Everybody opened up their phone the next morning to a new logo on their screen as well, and we thought that this would just be something that everybody appreciated, which wasn't exactly the case. Unfortunately, people had some thoughts and feelings about our slight change in green, which is easy to laugh at, and we certainly took it lightheartedly, but it was also a reminder that at that point that people had built a relationship with us and they were expecting something out of the brand. Even if we hadn't been intentionally designing it up to that moment, people still had something that they grabbed onto, and even that slight shift changed their expectations of what we might deliver. And it was a reminder to us that we need to be quite compassionate in the way that we evolve our brand in a way that's going to bring people along with us as opposed to alienate them. And even when we're not necessarily designing a moment, that moment is still being experienced by the fan. So we added a few more colors, probably more than the average brand does, in the interest of being sort of personable and vibrant, and also acknowledging that there's just so much that we need to communicate. Every artist has their own look and tone and feel. It's very hard to unify these things into one place that feels like it can be ownable for a single brand. So we've sort of created this, out of that color palette, this duotone look, which some of you may be familiar with if you've seen our work out in the world. It's sort of the way that we treat photography. But it's one way of just giving example to the idea of creating this sort of unified palette that we can use to build something that's a little bit more purposeful on top of Spotify singles are something we come out with every single week. I think we're up to our 500th now. And you can see how even though everyone is different and even though each one has its own personality, it's still very clearly Spotify. It's still very clearly within the same confines there. If you see one out in the world, you would associate it with the brand. And that's what we were going for, at least from a visual standpoint. Which brings us to purpose. We needed to go a little bit deeper than just changing the colors. And one insight that has driven that change, sort of like discovery of our own purpose, is around this idea that exploration is better than isolation. And one thing that we bring to everybody who uses Spotify is a window into the unknown, essentially. We bring them music they've never heard before. And everyone will self-identify if you ask them as being curious or open-minded. But it's hard to get people to deliver on that because at the end of the day, we like our bubbles. We like being in a space of comfort. We don't like being challenged on every single view. That's why Facebook and Twitter have become so successful in creating these interest-specific feeds that cut out anything that's novel or that can otherwise sort of challenge your point of view. We thought that was a great opportunity to push in the other direction. Music is an easy place to get people out of their comfort zone. It's not that big of an investment to try something new. So that became the core of our brand. We decided to build it around this idea of being a brand sort of built around discovery, even more fundamental than just the music itself. So we've learned a few things along the way. I wanted to go through just a couple of points using some of the work that we've created off the back of that to talk about at least how we've thought about creating a modern brand in a way that I hope can be useful to those of you who are doing the same. A couple of points. The first, one thing that we remind ourselves of all the time is that it's a crime to be boring, and talking about yourself can be really, really boring. Nobody wants to go to a party with someone who just talks about themselves the whole time. And the same is true for a brand, even for a brand that it lives inside of a space as interesting as music culture. So we never want to be talking about ourselves when we can talk through the voice of an artist or through the voice of a fan. And thankfully, we have these piles of data that are aggregated and anonymized and turned into this very rich sort of tapestry of insight that we can use. One of the things that we give every artist who's on Spotify is this dashboard, which lets them see all of their fans and where their fans are. So artists in the States may discover they have, 280,000 fans in Brazil. Or they may find that some of their music is being played a lot on playlists that they didn't expect. It gives them insight into how people are interacting with their music. It's just this pile of data that you can use for all sorts of different purposes. And not in addition to the way that we use it in marketing, artists are using it themselves. A couple of years ago, Metallica decided to work with us to build their set lists for every date on a global tour based around the songs in each of those areas that would trend highest on Spotify. So while the fans who were going to those shows didn't have any idea something was happening behind the scenes, they were getting a more relevant show because Metallica was tapping into the insight of who was listening to what in Sao Paulo versus in London versus in Los Angeles, and building their set list live accordingly. It also gives us some insight into the way that people think about the music that they listen to. This is a chart. So there are billions of user-created playlists on Spotify, and people often use emojis within their playlist titles. And so we pulled out some of the most popular artists and looked at which emojis they're most commonly associated with based on the emojis people use in the playlists with them on it. So Drake is obviously sort of a party. Adele is some sort of cocktail of sadness and sleep, I guess, which makes sense. But it's our connotative language, and you can pull so much out of it. It becomes so interesting, and that's sort of what formed the base of a lot of this data storytelling that we've come to use around the globe, telling people stories about themselves, essentially. Williamsburg, the incredibly hipster neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York, is actually full of Bieber fans, as it turns out. So we decided to remind them of that, which I don't think they were quite as happy with, but hey, it's true. You can't argue with it if it's true. We also every year put out a sort of end-of-year campaign in which we take all the data that we've sourced over the course of the year and build some stories around it, some of which are profound, some of which are silly. But that's sort of the voice that we speak through. So it's all about what everyone did on the platform that year as opposed to what we did. And for example, this year, one of the biggest hits was Ariana Grande's God is a Woman. So we looked at how many playlists had been created, God as a woman versus a man, clearly quite a clear consensus there by the Spotify users. Some are a little bit, I wouldn't call them meaningless, but let's just call them trite. Looking at how people are listening to true crime podcasts. Careful, one of them might be right behind you. or something as completely frivolous as yodeling playlists, which, as it turns out, there are a lot of yodeling playlists. Those songs you want to yodel and cry to. I haven't listened to the tracks on that. I'd be curious. But these are big out-of-home boards that we put up around the globe, and we regionalized across, I think, 35 different countries using local data in each one of those markets to tell interesting stories about those particular places. We also work with our artists at the end of the year to help them tell their own stories of who was successful. I think it's a short video. If we can get the sound up. Uh-oh. We'll try that again. It's sort of essential. Nope. Okay, just one moment. Yeah, we're fortunate to have the partnership of a lot of the major artists every year who like telling these stories as well. It's a good moment for them when they have a good year and they can talk about how many plays they've had, how many new fans they've developed. So typically, we often have them reaching out to us and saying, we have a really good idea for a video or an activation or something along those lines. We can just skip past it, that's all right. Equally importantly, because that starts to veer into an area of talking about ourselves, we give each user a look back at their year in music. I don't know if anybody here got theirs at the end of the year, but you connect your Spotify account and it essentially pulls together a year's worth of data and tells you about a dozen different facts about how you listened over the course of the year, starting with your first of the year. So in this case, someone listened to Love Galore by SZA as their first track. They discovered Leon Bridges as their first artist, and the first playlist they explored was called Swagger. I mean, who remembers their first, the first track that they listened to at the beginning of the year? So it's a fun moment when people sort of snap back into a memory, essentially. We also realized that a lot of people's first tracks are played immediately after midnight on New Year's, so not many people actually remember them at all. And at the end of it, it gives you this share card, which is, ultimately, of course, it's marketing. It's something that we have created to go out into the world to sort of spread the word, but it doesn't feel like that to a user. It feels like something that's deeply personal. It's very much about them. That talks about the number of minutes that they listen, their top genres, their top artists, and we have over 10 million shares of those this year, just of the individual cards themselves. And give people something to talk about, and it doesn't feel like it's advertising at all. 2, trusting your audience. It's not, it's absolutely essential. This is something that's come up in conversations a few times just this week. How do you trust your audience, and how do you get around the idea that we all have KPIs to hit and huge objectives that we need to reach every year as marketers, but you also have to balance how blunt we are with how nuanced we are as communicators. Hip-hop fans in the crowd? Anyone? A few, okay. Rap Caviar is our largest hip-hop playlist, 14 million weekly listeners now, I think it is. And we set out about a year and a half ago to start creating some campaign work around it to bring hip-hop fans into Spotify using Rap Caviar as a hook. It's 40 tracks every week of the hottest tracks in hip-hop, essentially. So in addition to renaming it, doing some brand design work, creating a bit of a logo around it, we also wanted to find a way to communicate with these fans in a way that felt like we were creating for them, not that we were creating just for us. And that meant moving a little bit away from our master brand and creating an identity system that felt like it was more hip-hop than it was Spotify in a way, even though it clearly fits inside of our sort of design structure. But the main idea was that if we wanted to have any sort of authenticity with a very sophisticated audience like this, that we had to meet them halfway and trust that they were going to understand where we were coming from on the other side of it. So when it came to launching the actual campaign, we put together a set of, this is some of the out of home, but it was a full campaign in which we never actually mentioned an artist's name. We just mentioned a fact that if you're a big hip hop head, you'll recognize. So whether that's, what is Caviar was sort of the contrivance, but it's having a 6-month-old executive producer in the case of Jay-Z. It's not showing up to your own music video in the case of Future, or having a #1 record while still living in your mama's house in the case of an artist named Lil Uzi Vert. So if you know, you know. If you don't know, you don't know. And that was fine because we weren't trying to convert people to become hip-hop fans. We were trying to take those who already knew what we were talking about and bring them in with a bit of a wink and a nod. And that's sort of another thing that we've written in so many briefs. If you try to make something for everybody, it's not really going to appeal to anyone at all. And so trusting your audience is akin to making sure that you actually hone in on that group that you're trying to reach and make sure you're truly just designing for them if you have the opportunity to do so. One other group that a very large group and quite a global group, Prince fans that we did a campaign for toward the end of last year, or at the end of 2016 rather. We got a really exciting call that, well, after, I would say, 10 years of pulling all of his music off of streaming services, Prince's estate wanted to bring his whole catalog back to Spotify. Such a huge moment, for the fans especially. They were going to launch it on the day of the Grammys, and so we thought, this is such a great opportunity, let's buy a TV ad. Of course, it's all sold out because everything's happening at the very last minute. So we talked to our media team, and they said, well, it's not much, but we bought out the most populous train station in New York for a 2-week period that runs around that time. There's a ton of ad space in there, and we're going to be the only advertiser, and we didn't really know what we were going to put there yet. So we thought this could be a moment to do something for the fans in a way that would perhaps pique some interest and perhaps get us some earned media beyond that. Mind you, we can't actually talk about the fact that Prince is coming back onto the platform at this point. So we just turned the whole station purple from top to bottom with the Spotify logo on it to see if we could get people talking. And they did. Some more happily than others. But a lot of conspiracy theories abounded. The idea was that we wanted to create a bit of even a viral moment just off of the anticipation without any sort of news out there at all. So this is across a station where about 150,000 people pass through every day. Lots of sort of viral content that just came directly out of that moment. It's sort of a startling thing to walk into such a big space and have it all be one color. That was my favorite of them. We've reached new levels of late. True. Guilty. But there was a point. So the morning of the Grammys, we had a crew go in very early in the morning and take everything down and replace it, of course, with the reveal. It would have been just as easy for us to put up a billboard in Times Square that said, Prince now on Spotify, but we wanted to give the fans a little bit of that mystery, which was so sort of in tune with Prince's legacy as well. So we got to have sort of both moments of that occur. A moment of trusting our audience, I think. And that was also a moment of sort of latching onto a brief moment of culture that presented itself at the right moment, which is not something that every brand gets an opportunity to do every day, but it's something we've been fortunate enough to find ourselves in, a position to find ourselves in on more than one occasion. But that means that there's a sense of sort of restraint that we need to bring to the picture as well. So that's sort of the third point here. Moving at the speed of culture takes both patience and speed. If you're trying to tap into a cultural moment, there's something that happens every minute of every day that we could decide we want to comment on as a brand. Sending a tweet about Valentine's Day that somehow ties back to our product, or finding something brand new to create a viral moment for ourselves. But finding patience and picking those moments very diligently is what makes them ultimately successful. But once those moments are identified, of course, as we all know, anyone who's been in that situation, it means getting it out the door as quickly as humanly possible. So one case from last year, at the very end of Barack Obama's term as president, he had a meeting with the Swedish ambassador. Spotify is a Swedish company. And a reporter at the end of the interview asked what Obama's plans were after he left office. And he jokingly said he was still waiting for his job offer at Spotify, which we all looked at each other and were like, well, we have to offer him a job, which is not exactly the traditional role of marketing, but in this case, it felt right. So this is where, to bring it back to sort of the in-house, out-of-house divide, where being an in-house agency really allowed us to shine. This article was posted midday on a Friday. We'd approved a concept afternoon on that Friday. Had already spoken with our own CEO and made it back down. By Saturday afternoon, had finished what we were going to do, and then on Sunday morning, we put it out into the world. So it took us about 36, 38 hours to get there, and we wrote him a job description for the president of playlists. One of our very talented copywriters worked through the night to finish this, and we posted it to the actual job site, much to the chagrin of our recruiting team. But it's not just any job description, of course. It had some very specific elements to it, like at least 8 years experience running a highly regarded nation, or someone with good team spirit, excellent work ethic. Not many people can fit that brief, I don't think. So it seemed pretty clear. And with a single tweet from our CEO, to the president, we pushed it out into the world. And I think because we were able to capture it right inside of that news cycle, before the news cycle had even really realized what was going on, we were able to make a bit more of a moment. Let's see if the sound works yet. Nope, not quite. Well, they're talking about it, I can assure you. But yeah, we were surprised on Monday morning that Good Morning America was talking about it, and Fox Business was talking about it, and Indeed, I think it was about 130 different stations decided to pick it up as a bit of a fluff piece, but generated about $10 million in earned media off the back of essentially a single tweet and something that we put up on the website. Now, like I said, that's not something that you can hope for every day, having essentially the world's most famous media brand and the President of the United States mention your brand in some way you can leverage. But it was a moment when we're happy that we had been patient to wait for the right moment to try and strike. I think if we had been trying to latch onto every time something interesting happened in music culture every moment of every day, it would have diluted the effect we could have had in this moment. So to bring it back to the beginning, I guess 3 thoughts to sum those 3 up in a way that at least I hope is useful to those of you who are building brands in a similar arena. Finding humanity in your data is essential. I hope that came through in some of the ways that we're using it. Yes, of course, it's a big, robust data stack, but ultimately we're using it to try and give fans a fingerprint and show them a little bit more about themselves, not just show a chart or a graph for the sake of itself. To trust the consumers that we want to reach. I know we've mentioned it a number of times, but ultimately that's the thing that we are always trying to hold ourselves to, even when it means making a less obvious statement than we probably could, or making the logo smaller, or sometimes not showing the logo at all. We're lucky to have a CMO who lets us do that. But and don't be afraid to go fast. I think if we had stopped to second guess if we were going to make a job description for the president, or got into a room with too big of a team, or had a number of PR agencies in there working with us on it, it just would have bogged down the process and we wouldn't have had that moment. So the speed of it, I think, is as essential as anything else. But that's us. A lot all at once, but hopefully a little bit of visual caffeine for the morning. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Pentel. That was really fun lecture. And now we're going to open the Q&A session. Now let's see what question our website's agency picked up. Hey, Mr. Pentel. Please, can you join me on stage again for the questions? I'm sorry. He forgot. Hey, please.
Hi.
One big applause for Mr. Pentel again.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
We have a couple of questions for you.
Okay, let's do it.
So.
Sorry, I was in search of water.
Don't run away, please. So the first question is Spotify planning to come to the Serbian market?
We'd like to be everywhere, but that's, I guess, all I can say about it now. I'm not entirely sure, but out of my control, thankfully not my department.
Okay, another one. What is your favorite Spotify playlist for a long drive?
There's a playlist called Pollen, Pollen, that we launched about 6 months ago. That's sort of a perfect mid-tempo R&B road trip playlist. That one I had on the top of my tongue, yes, for sure.
Great, you prepared for the questions.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, can you share some info about building Spotify as a podcasting brand?
Interesting question. I mean, yeah, you've seen the news as about our recent acquisitions, and obviously I know that our CEO has been out in the world talking quite a bit about our expansion into that universe. From a brand standpoint, it just means that, for a long time we've sort of built up, I think, a hard-fought position in being a brand that stands for music and that's associated with music and music culture. Now it's up to us to expand that into a broader audio offering in a way that doesn't dilute the cultural resonance we've created around music itself. Still need to be able to, build a Rap Caviar campaign, even though we're also out there talking about true crime podcasts. So I think there's a bigger umbrella that we need to create from a brand standpoint.
Great. And the fourth one, how would you sum up Spotify's social media strategy?
It's the core of everything we do. It's our main customer service channel. We have piles of always-on content, and we're always interacting with artists as well, which I think is probably the most unique element of it, from at least that we have access to, is that interplay between ourselves and the artists who we're promoting. So I think, yeah, it'd be hard to sum it up in less than an entire day, I think, but it's at the core of everything, and we think of it as sort of like a sort of the underpinnings of all of our marketing and interactions with fans as well.
Okay, thank you, Zach. You can leave us
Thanks.
now.
No, okay. Thank you.
You had my check out. Thank you.